Alright, so I want to do a different video today. As someone who is trying to get back into the UFC, I want to start doing my predictions on the upcoming fight cards. I am not aware of every fighter in the organization, but I am gonna go over the main cards and interesting prelims to me. Now, I'm going to start this video off by saying I apologize for every mispronunciation of names. So tomorrow night we will be having a UFC Fight Night event in the UFC Apex. This card will be headlined by Kai Kara France versus Amir Albazi. A prelim fight that I found interesting is a heavyweight belt between Dontel Mays and Andrei Arlovski. Mays is coming into this fight with a record of 9 wins, 5 losses, and 1 no contest. In his last 3 fights, he beat Josh Parisian by a 3rd round TKO. Then he lost a split decision to Hamdi Abdulwahabi, but was later overturned to a no contest. And in his last fight, he lost a unanimous decision to Augusto Sake. And as for Andrei Arlovski, who was a UFC legend fighting at the age of 44, he comes in with a record of 34 wins, 21 losses, and 2 no contests. In his last 3 fights, he beat Jared Vanderraa by split decision, then beat Jake Collar by split decision, and in his last fight, lost to Marcos Rogeria de Lima by 1st round submission. So even at Arlovski's older age, he is still fighting with fighters on the edge of the top 15 rankings. And Mays is quite possibly looking for the biggest win in his career here. That being said, Mays hasn't looked too impressive, so I am taking Arlovski to win by decision in this fight. And to start off the main card, Abubakar Nurmagomedov faces off against Elijah Zaleski dos Santos in the welterweight division. In the last 5 years or so, I'd say, Dagestani fighters like Nurmagomedov have been on the rise for their pressure fighting style. And with Nurmagomedov being a cousin of Khabib, there's a lot of expectations for him in the UFC. And on his career so far, Nurmagomedov has a record of 17 wins, 3 losses, and 1 draw. And in his last 3 fights, he lost to David Zawada by 1st round submission. Then he beat Jared Gooden by unanimous decision. And in his last fight, Nurmagomedov beat Godzi Omar Gadziev by unanimous decision. Dos Santos has a career record of 23 wins and 7 losses. In his last 3 fights, he beat Alexei Kucheko by unanimous decision. Then he lost a split decision to Muslim Sulekov. And in his last fight, he beat Bennett St. Denis by unanimous decision. And I am going to pick Dos Santos here to win the fight by 2nd round knockout or TKO. Then the next fight will be Karine Silva versus Caitlin Souza in the women's flyweight division. Karine Silva has a career record of 15 wins and 4 losses, coming off her UFC debut where she beat Polyana Botello by 1st round submission. And her opponent has even less UFC experience, as Caitlin Sousa is making her UFC debut coming from Invicta. She has a career record of 13-3, but Sousa's last 3 fights in Invicta were all wins by unanimous decision. So because of that, I think Karine Silva has a little more firepower, and I am picking her with a second round submission. The next fight is an interesting one between Tim Elliott and Victor Altamirano in flyweight. In his career, Tim Elliott has a record of 18-12 with 1 draw and is currently the 11th ranked fighter in flyweight. And in his last 3 fights, he beat Jordan Espinoza by unanimous decision. He lost to Matthias Nicolou by unanimous decision. And in his last fight, Tim Elliott beat Tygar Ulanbekov by unanimous decision. As for Victor Altamirano, he has a career record of 12-2. And in his last 3, he lost a split decision to Carlos Hernandez, beat Daniel Da Silva by first round TKO, and beat Vinicius Salvador by unanimous decision in his last fight. Altamirano is an up-and-coming fighter in the UFC, and even though Tim Elliott is still really good, I am choosing Altamirano to win this fight by decision. The featured bout of this card is Jim Miller versus Jesse Butler at lightweight. Now, Jim Miller is one of the most accomplished UFC fighters in history. He has the most fights in UFC history. Miller has the most wins in UFC history. Which, interesting note, Andrei Arlovski, who will be fighting earlier in this card, as we talked about, only has 1 less win in his career than Miller does. And he is tied with Donald Cerrone for the second most finishes in UFC history, only behind Charles Oliveira. And Jim Miller has publicly stated that he wants to become the only fighter who has fought for UFC 100, 200, and 300. And with the next UFC pay-per-view being UFC 289, and those numbered events coming about every month, that means Jim Miller, at 39 years old, is planning to fight for at least another year. Now, on that career, he has a record of 35-17 with 1 no contest. And in his last 3 fights, he beat Nicolas Motta by second round TKO. He beat Donald Cerrone by second round submission. Then in his last fight, he lost a unanimous decision to Alexander Hernandez. As for Jesse Butler, he has a career record of 12-4 and is making his UFC debut coming from Fury FC. Butler is usually a featherweight, but he moved up to fight Jim Miller on short notice. Now, Butler has a lot of potential at featherweight, but how crafter Miller is, he's a tough guy to take on a short notice training camp. And because of that, I think Jim Miller will win this fight by decision. On to the co-main event, which will be Alex Caceres versus Daniel Pineda in the featherweight division. Alex Caceres has a career record of 20-13 with 1 no contest and is currently the 15th ranked featherweight. His last 3 fights, he beat Seungwoo Choi by second round submission. Then he lost to Sofiq Youssef by unanimous decision. And in his last fight, Caceres got a huge head kick knockout in the first round to Julian Erosa. For Daniel Pineda, he has a career record of 28-14 with 3 no contests. One of those no contests came recently after an accidental eye poke from Andre Fili. But his last 3 fights were a loss to Cub Swanson by second round KO, then it was a no contest against Andre Fili, and in his last fight he beat Tucker Lutz by second round submission. I think Caceres will be able to keep his rank and win this fight by decision. And the main event of this card is Kai Kara-France versus Amir Albazi. Kai Kara-France has a career record of 24-10 with 1 no contest, and is currently the 3rd ranked fighter in flyweight. Kai Kara-France's last 3 fights are he beat former bantamweight champion Cody Garbrandt by first round KO. He beat Askar Askarov by unanimous decision. And in his last fight, he lost the interim title belt to Brandon Moreno, who Moreno went on to unify his interim title and is currently the flyweight champion. As for Amir Albazi, he has a career record of 16-1 and is currently the 7th ranked fighter in flyweight. He beat Zalugas Zahumalov by unanimous decision. He beat Francisco Figueiredo, Devison's brother, by first round submission, and beat Alexandro Costa by 3rd round KO. And I will be choosing Albazi to win this fight by 4th round submission. And this would put Albazi in an interesting position, as he would just have beaten someone who has fought the champion twice. And I'm not including Devison Figueiredo, as I'm almost certain that he will move up to bantamweight. But if Albazi wins, it probably means he is next in line for a title shot. And yeah, these are my thoughts on the UFC fight card. I don't think I'm the most knowledgeable on MMA, but let me know what you think about this.